Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm okay. I like to get high by sniffing poison fumes out of meteorites.
Yeah.
So if I take a break during this episode, that's what I'll be doing. What about you?
Yeah, I'm good. I've got my pot of synthetic food aside and ready to go. So, I'm all ready to be talking about Quatermass 2. Which is what we're going to be delving into today. We had the discussion. It was agreed. We did the Quatermass experiment not long ago. And we're going to finish what I consider to be the sort of the Hammer Quatermass trilogy. There is a final Quatermass story. It was done by the BBC as Quatermass and truncated into a film called The Quatermass Conclusion. But we won't be doing that because it doesn't fit in with this. But this is Quatermass 2 from 1957. And it tells the story of Quatermass and his rocket group, and I don't know, a subversive alien invasion. Really, I also watched the TV show in preparation for this to make some comparisons, and we'll be talking about that. But first off, there, Julian, Quatermass 2. What were your thoughts? Or your initial thoughts on this film, especially in comparison to the others we've watched?
Well, yeah, I've thought about that. It's a fascinating question. I think that it feels, I don't know, I think all three of them feel slow to modern sensibilities. But I think that in some ways I like this more, at least than the first one. And I think it's interesting how it's a sort of it's fascinating how much it reiterates from the first one and also prefigures the third one. They're sort of like all drafts of very similar stories.
Yeah, I get it. It feels like Nigel Neal is perfecting something with these. But this one more than the first one. Like the first one, it feels like a straight sci-fi story. It's sort of Quatermass sent a rock up into space, and upon its return back, something infected and sort of mutated the astronauts, and they've got to take that out. It's a relatively straightforward sci-fi story. This one, to me, has much more of a stab at, like we were talking just off air about, sort of creations that have got a bit more satire or bile driven behind them. This feels like it has a point. Like there's something like there's something poking at British society with this one, like this post-war society, as well as sort of like government bureaucracy. This one feels a bit more pointed to me, and I like it. I really enjoy this film. Another thing, more than that, Brian Dunleavy is less horrible in this one than he is in the last one.
Well, I want you to elaborate on sort of how it's poking at British society. But I want to say that I felt like I feel like of the three, this is the one that is more of an action movie. I mean, it's really the first act. Him escaping from the complex, where you're like, oh, Quatermass is dodging machine gun fire now. We're in James Bond territory. And that's not really territory that the first one or the third one really go to. So that was very different. And I also felt like because of that, and because, he's had his plans for the base, stolen, and he's up against it, and he's being fired at right from the start, it justifies Dunleavy's portrayal of the arrogant Quatermass a lot better than the first one did. I understand why he's got to be a dick. Much better.
Yeah, there's Good point actually. Is it his portrayal that's changed, or is it the sort of the scope of the film that's changed and actually makes it more acceptable for him to be a bit of a dick? I don't know. That's interesting. You're right though about the action in this, and that actually comes as a direct thing from the BBC. But the first film the first TV program and the first film were more of a mystery. There was it was more of a sci-fi horror than anything. I think there was notes that it was a little slow, and so that they do inject more action into this. That's not to say that the horror's gone. There's some real interesting moments, and even the sort of the concept of this I find fascinating in that horror sort of sci-fi horror set. But they introduced a lot more action. I would say though that the opening of this film, and the reason for inserting Quatermass into this story, in the film, it's all coincidence. Like, I'm not entirely sure where Quatermass is coming from or going to, but he's traveling some 80 miles away from the rocket base that he lives and works at, and just so happens to come across a couple. Their car careens off the road, and he finds that the driver, the young man, has got a boil on his face or a mark on his face, and they have this shell, this meteorite, and so that sort of kicks it off. It's all coincidental. It's all that sort of thing. In the TV series, which is it's a bit more drawn out. They have 6 episodes. Each one's half hour long. It's a military base in the sort of northeast of England, that sees these on a radar training mission. So they've got these radar training bases set up, and they spot them, and they're like, well, what the hell is that? And someone actually tells them, don't ask questions. You're not supposed to see these things, and you're not supposed to ask them questions, suggesting that they've already infiltrated the military. But a captain sort of who, again, doesn't really appear in the show, in the film, comes across one when he's out, and then he's like, I've got someone I've worked with in the past who I think would be interested in this, and then takes it to Quatermass. And it feels a lot more natural that he's like, this is weird, I've come across it, I've got to take it, and then brings Quatermass in, and it feels a lot more natural. Takes a little while, but yeah, and it's sort of a bit like with the first one, like it impacts in a British farm, and the farmer and his wife get infected and all this other stuff. So so they clearly had to speed this. You said about this being slow, but they clearly had to speed it up than the TV show. And there's a couple of things in this that, again, I'll make comparisons as we go through to the TV show. But I much prefer the kickoff to the TV show than I do to the film.
Yeah, it makes more sense. I mean, the other thing that is worth pointing out is that they have some asteroid that they somehow are able to monitor, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That should be another indication. Like, that asteroid is there. They should notice that, and that should be another indication something's up. That doesn't necessarily initiate the plot and get you to that base, but you think that the writers could come up with a way of doing that.
Yeah, it feels a little bit, because again, in the show, they basically they're not looking there. They acknowledge, like, space is really big and we're not actually looking there at the moment, and they redirect the radar. Like, there's some drop lines to it which explains it more. And there's a couple of other bits, because one of the big things in the TV show, actually, which is really interesting, it's not really it's picked up in the film. Oh, because the thing where Quatermass is coming from, he's been to see the minister because they've had a conversation about the future of the rocket group, and they're going to be shut down. They're not going to give them any more money. Because they're saying that it's never quite clear. They're saying it's because the rocket doesn't work, and that's the Quatermass 2. So he's even named the rocket after himself. In the TV show, you find out that this isn't the Quatermass 2, the rocket, because there was another ship that they tried to launch, and they're using this. They keep referring to it as the nuclear engine. Or the nuclear propulsion, and actually they were going to launch it out of the Australian outback, and so they attempted this prototype rocket, and instead of launching, it exploded and set off a nuclear weapon basically in the Australian outback, killing a number of people. So that's where the British government are basically saying, well, Quatermass, you've basically set off a nuclear weapon in Australia. We're not entirely sure we're comfortable with this thing sat in the English countryside. And so we're shutting you down until you can prove it's rugged. And then that ship, which again, the ship with the nuclear engine becomes important at the end of the story. So again, there's more setup in that first episode as to why all these things are happening. And in this, they're like, right, we've got 5 minutes, bang them in as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so it's easy. It would be easy to miss certain things that I think become important later in the story.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that after the first film or the first serial, that having done an unauthorized rocket launch and endangered all of humanity, nearly an extinction level event, might be enough that you don't need the atomic explosion in the outback. But I'm nitpicking. I will say, for how much they sped it up, though, I'm a fan of getting to a gunfight by 15 minutes in,
Yeah. No, I agree. And I will say that TV series runs at a 1950s TV show pace. I managed to watch it in a day. I binged it to get through it, and it's good and I enjoyed it. But yeah, there are certain episodes where I'm like, if I could if I knew what was coming, I could fast forward through the boring bits. But I agree, but I do like the fact that he is so sort of bothered by this straight away. That when he comes across this thing, he's like, I think we've got to look into this. This Winnerton Flats. We've heard this village is supposed to be there. They said it's not. That girl said it's not there anymore. And straight away he's like, yeah, this doesn't add up. I want to go see this Winnerton Flats now. What should be there? So I do like that they get straight to it, and you get what you get, really. So it opens well.
Yeah, and then you have this sort of long string of like, I'm going to go to this person. I'm going to go to that other person. I'm going to go to this other person, and everybody dies or fails to act. And it's sort of that long second act of figuring out what's really going on and sort of putting your team together to take action. I will say that, I mean, during that, it's cool to be like, oh, okay, this thing has killed a member of parliament. Like, those are some stakes. Like, even as a Yank, I recognize, oh no, that's some serious business.
Well, I love the fact that how this escalates. This is what I'm saying about British society, and you'll sort of gently rib me for being, specifically very British about things. This film is incredibly British. Like, like Quatermass's first thing is to go to like the local police. He's like, I must see the local chief of police to talk about this thing where my friend was kidnapped and I was threatened by machine guns.
Yeah.
And you're like, I think that warrants a bit. If you're working for the government, like that would be my first call. But he's like, no, I should go to the local police, and the local police are like, oh God, it sounds like a lot of work. Can't be bothered with this. But it's clear that it's this first bit though, and this is where I say it's sort of poked fun. Like I say, it's all very local. He goes to a local bobby, and it's this local sort of chief constable. But it's the localness of this that I find is very interesting. It's the local police, and they're like, well, here we don't do it that way. Well, we've got an agreement with that plant. We don't really bother. We don't bother them, and they don't bother us. It's like, well, they've just kidnapped my friend and fired machine guns at me. Yeah, well, and it's the same as when he gets into the town, and it's that thing again of and I should be careful with this, but this idea of compliance and almost like trade relations or trade relations, sort of union relations or something like that, where everyone in this small town, they don't have police because there's a great line where we don't need police. We're good people here. And it reminds me a little bit of like Royston Vasey, sort of like the League of Gentlemen. But there's this thing of like, and then they don't talk secrets. Oh, we don't tell secrets here. Just like in the war, loose lips sink ships kind of thing. And it's just this compliance with like, we don't know what that plant really does, but we all get jobs out of it. And that's all that matters. And we get to live our lives in a local, small community. And we all work, apart from the zombies. I love the fact they refer to them as zombies. They're a bit weird and they live on the camp, on the sort of the site. We don't ask questions. We go to work. We get paid, and we're happy. And obviously, when that doesn't break, that breaks down later when one of their own is killed, or attacked. And but I just find that really interesting. This sort of like poke at the localness of these communities and their willingness to comply with something that's clearly as sinister as fuck. But they're like, yeah, but we get a job out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is that effective satire, or is that just?
I don't think it's I'm not sure if it's intended satire.
Yeah, I mean, so is that just a sort of narrative justification for why they haven't done anything? I mean, it sort of reminds me of like Stranger Things, where you say, you've got this government installation, on the edge of this quiet little mountain town, or woodsy town. That's an enormous installation. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think like, realistically, I mean, at least here in the States, I would think you'd send a cop out, it'd be like, oh yeah, well, you say they fired machine guns at you, that doesn't sound good. I will investigate this. I can't imagine the, don't mess with that plant on the edge of town kind of mentality lasting that long.
Well, the reason this felt prescient for me, and it sparked something in me, this idea, if you don't mess with it, because it works for us, it came up with, so there was a disaster, and it's many years after this, so it obviously wasn't a satire of that, because it came almost a decade later. But this reminded me of the disaster of the Aberfan mine in Wales. And so it came, because I was watching it in this small town, because they're all over Britain, post-war, or all throughout the sort of 20th century, these little towns or these villages popped up, and they popped up near the place of work. So you'd have a mine, and then you'd have the mining village. I mean, one of the most famous and silly is the fact that Bonneville created Bonneville, where so the people could live next to the Cadbury factory, so they could all live there and work there. Much like this situation of, of course we'll build houses for you, but we literally own you, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But in Aberfan in the 1966, they'd all lived. This village existed at the base of this massive mountain of slurry, and not slurry, it's like the offshoot of all the mining stuff, all the coal dust and all the slag and all this other stuff. And the village was just like, well, that's the mine. That's what the mine does. The mine feeds us. We don't mess with the mine. Until there was sort of rumblings of this thing, and they'd been sort of like, we don't mess with it, and the people have been involved. This much like this. We don't talk about things outside because we've got to keep this as stable as possible. Until they gave a massive rainpour for several days, and that huge slag heap collapses and kills 110 kids in a school. It just rang true to me. They're like, this being British, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I don't think it exists particularly now. I think it's been broken over time and by a conservative government. But I do feel there was a time when a local community was driven by the local work. You couldn't commute. It's not the same thing. Like, I've got a car now. I can commute up and down the country if I wanted to. I can work remotely through these, through computers. In them days, in the sort of early into mid 20th century, you worked where you lived. Yeah. And that felt, to me, there was this thing of this village was like protecting this community felt more important than I didn't give a shit about the country. Because I've got to feed Maureen and the kids, and it's small-mindedness that sort of like, about protecting what was theirs rather than the bigger picture. While Quatermass is going like, there's something clearly wrong here, and so it just sort of struck home a little bit to me, looking at older generations that I know that would have had this mentality. and especially the guy that's sort of the Jobsworth, that's very much like loose lip sink ships. You know, we don't talk secrets here because the plant have told us to. If we want to keep our jobs, you don't talk about the plant, sort of thing. It all felt very. It felt like it would have existed, and maybe it's more present because I can look back on it. But I don't know. It felt true in a weird way.
Yeah, you've kind of talked me into this, and I don't know that it's particularly British. We have the same thing here. I associate it with a kind of fascist mentality, right? And it's true of mining towns here, where you have these mines that just, it's like, well, yeah, they've got 100 safety violations, and those are just what is on the record.
Yeah.
Nobody has complained. No, and if the government comes in and says, yeah, you need to do something, the workers fight the government. And they're like, yeah, that's our jobs. You're screwing with the mine, And you look at, and they say, well, this is our livelihood. You're like, really? Like, you're what'd your dad die from? Black lung. Okay, what'd your granddad die from? Black lung. How old did they live? One of them made them to the 50s. Right. And, yeah, but that's what's putting food on the table for my son and daughter. So, I mean, you do see that here, and that is still true today, where we've had mine disasters here. And obviously it's better than it was in 100 years ago. But, and then I think of like the Gulf oil spill, where, you have fishing communities that are like, yeah, we don't care. Get your government hands off my fishing. This is the town industry. We don't talk to outsiders. This is how it works. You don't understand what life here is like, you big city, Washington dicks. So, yeah, I mean, there's something to that.
Well, I think, like you say, it is true. It is still probably relevant today because, from an American point of view, I can think of the meat packing plants where it was clear that COVID was running rampant and people were still like, well, I've still got to go to work because, well, where else can I work? Like, this is what keeps the town going. And over here, we've currently got it with Brexit and fishermen. Well, yeah, I voted Brexit because I thought it was going to save my fishing community. Turns out maybe not the case, but that was what I was told. I didn't care about anything else. I was looking to protect my community. And it's this thing again. I think it's driven a lot of this right wingness at the moment. This populism of like this idea of community and going back to a better time, and there is a fear of globalization, I suppose, from these small communities.
Right, and outsider,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it is quintessentially fascist, though, because the mentality is it's the outsiders that are the problem. It's like what used to be said. What's good for Ford is good for America, right? Yeah. What's good for the mine is what's good for the town, right? What's good for this industry is what's good for the town. Well, bullshit. Where it becomes like the mine versus Washington or, the government. Whereas in reality, nobody's trying to shut this shit down, right? Somebody just wants accountability. Like, you realize that your stream is irradiated. Like, maybe the government needs to come in and inspect it. Nope, you're screwing with our industry. The whole mentality is sort of twisted in that.
Well, again, you talk about, that mentality being twisted, and you talk about fascists and now this fascist mentality. Like, you could easily take this as a fascist analog. This thing of this production plant where people go to work and they have these zombies, these people that have been, that they all wear a dark grey and black uniform, hugely compliant, and they're all in there. They do their job and they go home. What do you do in your job? We don't ask. It's not important. I get paid. I just do as I'm told. I'm following orders. It's not a far reach from that, especially in 57, to sort of, to say, okay, well, this what do you call, like a quisling? This thing is not just compliant. They're just, we don't want to talk about it because it's protecting us. It's not a far leap from that to basically death camps is what I'm getting at. But
yeah. Well, and it's interesting because the sort of like invasion of the body snatchers is so quintessentially seen as a communist parallel, right?
Mm.
So it would seem that I think my scholarly spider sense goes off and says, "Oh well, see, this is the communist invasion from these meteorites. It changes you in your mind, and except as you point out, this same drone-like behavior can be seen as a critique of capitalism. That in fact it doesn't, it might come from outside, but look at the way that capitalism is embracing of this. It's not necessarily a critique of the meteorite, it's a critique of, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Go to work for the aliens. Look, we're happy to work in the mines. We're happy to worship the queen bee alien. You don't understand. She gives us jobs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we all have to, we have to sacrifice one of us has to be sacrificed every year to the Wicker Man, but these things have to be taken into consideration. But the thing is, this comparison goes further, I think, because when it doesn't quite work out with the local authorities, Quatermass goes to the government. He still has connections with the government. He's still part of the ministry. He's still doing this, the rocket group and stuff. So he goes to see his minister. And when he goes to see them, the government are a bit like, yeah, look, with this investment in this, it's for synthetic food. It'll actually be good for the economy. It'll be good for Britain. It's this thing of going, look, as you said, we don't really want to rock the boat on this. There's people above my station that are saying we carry on with this and don't rock the boat. Apart from this one MP that's been given the rights to do a personal, an inquiry into this. But nobody really listens to him. And I love the fact that when he does come up, he's like, I've been given the runaround for a year. Like, no one's listening. This thing is so tarred in bureaucracy and hidden and all these other things. And granted, you do find that the aliens have invaded and become part of the government. But I love the fact that, they're keeping control, not through mind control, not through threat and intimidation, just by forms and paperwork.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like this invasion, the Quatermass invasion, happens literally because someone's like, "Oh, there's a lot of paperwork here. I'm not sure I can be bothered to deal with that." And I find that again, bureaucracy comes up in this film again and again, and the way they get into the plant is for a bureaucratic inspection.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. There's something about that. I just love that. It's not, we're not storming the gates. I'm not sneaking over the wall. I mean, that bit that comes later on. But the first time they get in, it's like, well, we have a pass and we're going to have a proper look. And we've got a team of people that are going to have we're going to have an inquiry and we're going to look at this and we're going to be shown around. And it's all very nicey nice. And I just find that fascinating that this is going to be a film about the failings of bureaucracy.
Well, I like what you're saying. Sort of like the aliens came to England because they saw capitalism and bureaucracy as the means by which they could take over or prevent themselves from being stopped. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the only way I can think about it. That's the only reason. I mean, again, because with the teeniest island, it's like, where else would they have landed in reality? Side fact: in the TV show, I don't think it's in the film. In the TV show, they highlight that the moon base, the thing, the Quatermass, they find one in Brazil and one in, I think it's Siberia. So there's a recognition that this isn't the only one.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Why do these meteors only fall on the UK? I mean, granted, it is God's chosen country, but
it is. It's beautiful out there. Beautiful. God's country. God's country. No, I don't know. It's one of those, and I always find this hilarious in films like this. When these things happen, even these days, everything happens in America. Apart from Quatermass, where it happens to it just so happens to happen in Britain. There's a reason. So in the TV series, they say there's like a reason that they're spread out across. So there's one in Brazil, one in the UK, and one in Siberia, I think. And so they give it more of a justification of it being spread out. But it is silly, especially when you're like, it's on the coast as well, not even central. Britain. So they're like, yeah, we're really, really targeting. Our aim is incredible because you've got this one village in northeast England.
Well, it's like superheroes only happen in America, right? And as a Doctor Who fan, aliens care about nothing more than infiltrating British Parliament. You know, I mean, you fly to Alpha Centauri, and it's all they're talking about is what's going on in Westminster.
Yeah, well, if you watch Prime Minister's Question Time on Wednesday, it may have already happened. There's some interesting characters in there.
I love Question Time. America should totally just adopt Question Time. I love the conflict of it and the rowdiness of it, despite the politeness. We're very rowdy in such a different way. We fight back against the interviewer, but our interviewers are weak. Anyway, I mean.
It is interesting that say that it happens in Britain, and it's one of those things it's a little silly, but when you go, this was a BBC show, you go, okay, it sort of makes sense.
The thing about the moon base, I like that there would be the moon bases. You could kind of justify it in like, oh well, clearly they need. I don't know why they need Quatermass's moon base scheme, but but you could kind of justify it as like, well, Quatermass is important. We need his moon-based plan. The government has it, so we're going to focus on England. Having said that, I do sort of getting back to these themes of sort of capitalism and bureaucracy. I do love that they take. I mean, first of all, it's just weird that Quatermass discovers his own moon base having been built. Like, that's so weird and cool. But I also love the concept of aliens treating us the way like we have treated natives, the way we have treated others. Aliens arrive. I love stories where like aliens arrive to the planet and they're like, we'll give you some corn for Manhattan. We'll just oh, who was I buying it from? Well, you shouldn't have humans selling Earth to us. So I love this idea of sort of like, no, the aliens are colonizing us. We are the inhospitable climate that they need the moon base for. That's quite a clever and delicious sort of turn.
Yeah, I love that. So because it's sort of again, I think there's a drop line in the film, but he says because the thing that Quatermass highlights is the pressurized domes and the ability to pass things between these domes. This is where people will live, but they are utilizing them they are using them to live in because they live in a nitrogen rich environment and rather than oxygen rich, and all that I love I love the aliens in this. They're not humanoid. They possess people. They break in through the skin. They're like a parasite, and they're able to live inside people and sort of possess them. But they're a single mind. And when they do see them later on, I love Quatermass. It's like they're tiny, they're these little creatures, but they can combine together to be 100 foot tall. And again, I love that. I love this idea of this like writhing mass of little creatures living in these domes and being fed this synthetic food and stuff.
Yeah, no, it's quite cool, and we're both fans of sort of the alien, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that all three of these films do well, right? Clearly, these are, completely non-humanoid invaders, right? In all three. Then you've got the sort of like, there is that sort of invasion of the body snatchers element in the first one, which is the astronaut who comes back, who, is obviously sort of possessed and absorbed the other two. And then, but here it's sort of done en masse. But then the ability of them to combine, and sort of become this horrible monster. I guess it sort of recalls the mass in the cathedral in the first, but then it also sort of prefigures the giant apparition in the sky in Quatermass in the Pit.
Yeah, again, there's sort of, like I say, drafts of different things. Cause I do like when they break out and they sort of, these huge things. I love miniatures. I love miniatures when they do effects. but they break out, and the thing that takes them out is the atmosphere starts to take them out. But then we'll get to the rocket in a little bit. Like again, it's that hive mind mentality takes them out. And I was a bit. We'll get to the end, but I want to raise it now. One of the things we talked about with the last one was that it was small enough to have been a cover up. You know, there were few enough people involved for you to say, oh, it was the astronaut that came back, but he had sort of like PTSD from the flight or something like that, and it's nothing. Don't worry about it, sort of thing, right? With this, there's enough people to sort of probably cover up parts of it, but then you're also going to go, well, they wiped out a village. We now know this plant is now covered in this massive stuff that's going to have to be cleaned up. Hundreds of people are now sort of without work because this plant is shut down. So that local economy is gone. This one seems a little harder to cover up. But it also has one of my favourite lines at the end of this. Going back to the bureaucracy we talk about, sort of like you have one of the ministers there or one of the people there, and he says about writing his final report on this. That's his concern. He's like, oh, got to go back and write my final report on this. And that Quatermass is, but how final can it be? And that thing is like, we don't know what happened out in space. Like my rocket hit it. We hope it seems to have had an effect. We do not know what is out there. And I kind of like that as an end note. I love the fact that, like I say, the guy's concern is, I've got to write this up, which is crazy. But then also Quatermass is going like, well, I'm not entirely sure this is over.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me, I think that's a good point, especially teasing the bureaucracy theme. It struck me as sort of like the end of the action movie where, somebody, the cop says like, I'm not filling out the paperwork on this one. Sort of like joke about that. But it seems sort of like, I found that sort of last bit of dialogue unsatisfying for me personally, because I took that I wasn't thinking of the bureaucratic theme as deeply as you are, but so I took that as kind of the cliche about paperwork, and then Quatermass's sort of like, oh, really, is it? Sort of the end ? I found it to be almost like a shorthand version of the ending of the first one, whereas I find it more interesting that Quatermass is like, yeah, I almost extinguished the human race, but we're not going to stop sending rockets up. Like I'm a visionary. Elon Musk don't pay attention to that. I found that more interesting as a more interesting way of sort of saying what's coming next. Whereas this is sort of like, yeah, well, we don't know how many aliens are out there or how much of this goo is out there. So I found this sort of almost like a shorthand version of that ending from the first one.
I agree with you from Quatermass's point of view, because it's that sort of thing of like, well, I'm going to carry on doing this stuff regardless of how dangerous it is. But yeah, no, so I do find it interesting. We'll get to the ship actually in a little bit, because one of the things I find interesting as well in this, and it's sort of, again, it's fleshed out a little bit in the show, but there's something in this is the meteorites. There is a mystery around the meteorites. So they sort of, you see someone is infected by one and taken away, but you see this sort of oval shape, and there's ones that's broken up, and then they put it back together, and they're like, oh, it's a bit. It looks like, why are they not shattered everywhere? Like, why? Because they're hollow. We see they're hollow, so why are they not shattered everywhere? And then they put it together and and they acknowledge, like, using mathematics and sort of, this other stuff, they calculate what it would have looked like before it entered Earth's atmosphere. And it's like a little rocket, a little stone rocket. And you can see them, and they're like, so it would have done this, and they actually sort of explain that, well, because of the way it was probably spinning, and in which case it would have slowed its entry down. This is really interesting. And then, well, that would have taken into, precision, which takes mathematics, which takes intelligence. And they're like, and there's a dawning on their face, and they're like, oh shit, like this isn't accidental. These are targeted. And I kind of like that moment in the film when there is that realization of like, oh, this is bigger than we thought.
Yeah, I like that moment too. Although obviously the like meteorites shaped like rockets is so utterly laughably absurd, and it's so laughably absurd that it's almost that it is charming in its
Yeah.
utter ridiculousness. In the best way of sort of 50s sci-fi. Um, but you were talking about the mystery and how this is sort of part of the mystery. Um, I found the meteorites and the mark on the face, like I mean, the mark on the face is one of the weaker elements of the whole thing. It sort of lets you. It's kind of necessary because you have to establish, like, see, the government is infiltrated,
It's
and
needed
this
for
is the
those.
shorthand.
Yeah, it's needed for those reveal moments, isn't it, to show how you identify who and who isn't infected, sort of thing. So yeah, it's used as a cliffhanger more than once in the TV series.
Well, and it's also kind of like, why would infection of these aliens produce that? It's a little sort of like Mark of the Beast, um, you know, which again, sort of kind of like prefigures the supernatural elements in the third one.
Mm.
But so I found like the gas coming out of a meteorite is not the most fascinating idea to me. I will say, like, the overall mystery of sort of what's going on in this moon base that has been built, despite that I can't get funding to actually build a moon base. Um, Seeing that built has got to be one of the biggest sort of mind f's. And then the guy covered in oil, or black substance, that is creepy. And saying like, "Don't touch me," as he dies. That's some creepy stuff. So I quite love elements of this mystery, even though I dig how actiony it is. But I do think there are parts of this mystery that really work well.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that. Again, they go have their inquiry and they go to visit the plant, and that the MP, shuffles off. And again, like I say, it's creepy because I love you've got like the tour guide who is very dapper and very well dressed and very well presented, and he's trying to present this sort of like, well, everything's all right, and of course I'm going to show you everything, but you can't go in those because, well, it's a working plant and that area is dangerous. And that's where the MP goes. And like you say, yeah, he comes out and when they find out he's missing, and Quatermass comes off it, and he comes down those steps, and the fact it's steaming as well when he comes out of it, like it's steam coming off it. I don't know what they used. This is the 50s. They probably used tar for all I know. Yeah, it looks really good, and like it really, I do like the way this builds. Well, like, because I like the fact that as well that Quatermass doesn't. He can't just put it together. It's not like there's not like an aha moment. Like he keeps having to figure things out. Like it comes in stages. But yeah, no, I do kind of like all that stuff. And again, that's one of my favourite moments is when he comes out and he's covered in the black oil and sort of
and he sort of stumbles down that staircase quite beautifully.
Yeah, I will say, right, if what's it got, the guy who did the X-Files, Chris Carter, with the black oil in that TV show, like he clearly watched Quatermass. Like, if anyone tells me different, he's lying. Yeah, but again, like I say, one of the things you say about this mystery, I love that this film keeps trying to do different things. And so they have this thing, and they're like, right, well, the best way to deal with this then is we're going to get the press involved, which is a very sort of like the trusting of the press. And so they bring in a sort of a reporter, and they're like, look, if he can see this, he can get the news out to people, and they will have to believe him. And I love that as such a quaint idea in 2021 that, like, if we can get a news person to report on this, the world, of course, is going to believe us.
Is it quaint? I mean, I feel like so naive that I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't a cop do his job in a small factory town? You've destroyed my notions of that already this episode. I mean, how many movies and stories do we have in which somebody's trying to get something to the press, in the belief that they're going to cover it and people will believe it? I guess it is kind of quaint to believe that people would believe facts and news these days. But we live in a post-fact world. Maybe we always did. I don't know.
I don't know. Well, I think throughout the 20th century, I think there was an admiration and for the press. But there's a reason that Clark Kent became a news reporter and not a policeman. There's a reason that you have all these films of sort of like where the star is, Cary Grant plays a news report, a newsman or whatever. Like there's an admiration in it for a long time, and I think it still existed in the 50s. I think it went away probably more I think it starts to get tarnished in the 70s. But you still get like Watergate and where the press is heavily involved and stuff, and there's stuff over here as well where these things happen, these scandals break because the press are able to tell the truth. I think it's a bit more difficult in this day and age now. And I wish we could go back to that time, but I do think it's interesting to watch it, to sort of, though we have an alien invasion, we have something really weird going on. The best way to get out is through the press, and it does feel a bit quaint. The other stumbling block I have for this is the guy who plays the reporter. In this he is credited as Sidney James. I know him as Sid James, and just after this, he would start a career in what is known as the Carry On films, which are a series of 32, I think, sort of like lurid British comedy films that ran from early. Before this, they started, I think, in the sort of the 50s and 60s, but he joined in the early 60s. And it was the same cast. Every film was the same cast, and they would just be sort of a different thing. So you had like Carry On Sergeant about the police, or Carry On Nurse, and Carry On Doctor, and Carry On the Khyber. Some of them are very good, some not. But they're all sort of like, Barbara Windsor was in them. It's like, oh, look at the boobies, kind of thing. It's all very silly, very, very silly British humour. But I've known this since I was a kid, so I've just known him as sort of like this dirty middle-aged man in all these films of like, sort of making these jokes. So to see him in this serious sci-fi film really sort of like is a stumbling block for me, because I'm waiting for him to call sort of someone like, oh look, it's Mr. Dinkle Lord, and make some joke about it. And so
so casting him as like, Quatermass, you've gone to the press in the vain belief that the press will be your savior. Little did you know the reporter is out for booby.
Yeah, he's gonna be called that. Yeah, his name's Mr. Whoopi, and you're sort of like, I get it, because in this day and age, you go, oh, of course, people play different things, but for pretty much all of my life, Sid James has been affiliated with the Carry On films. So this is always a bit of a stumbling block for me when I'm like, oh no, you are something else. But I do like the idea, and I love the fact as well, though, that he gets killed as well. Like this film, in fact, we're going to get to another moment in a minute, but this film doesn't hold back.
And like I said, I mean, this sort of like whole second act is sort of like another attempt after another attempt to sort of get somebody to break through, and so and then everybody dies. And that's the main reason why they don't work is they die, which is another part of why, I mean, you were talking about why this would be hard to cover up. I mean, in the first one, you did have the BBC broadcasting alien life. But in this one, you have a member of parliament, for God's sake, being killed.
Well, more than that is, again, there's a slight change in the narrative in this midsection, the sort of second act, that sort of leads into the finale. The village revolts against the plant. And in the TV show, it happens very much because of the killing of the news reporter. So in the film, it happens because of the killing of the news reporter. They're having some... No, and the girl gets, isn't it? There's a young woman who gets infected, and then there's the killing of the news reporter. So the village sort of turns on them. In the TV show, again, it's there's an old couple having the 35th wedding anniversary, and again, like those old people get killed, and so there's this turning where the village is like, hang on a minute. The source of our income is now willing to kill us, and we're still told there's an explicit line. I don't think it's in the film, but it's in the show, where they're like, someone confronts the guards, and they actually say sort of like, you're here to do your job. And he pushes this guy out the way, and then they take someone away after having killed his people, and that's when the village sort of turns, and that's when it sort of brought home that like, no, you don't matter. Like you're here to comply and do as you're told. Like, stay in your place, sort of thing, and that's when they revolt. And it's still again, it came back to this idea of trade union relations, of this idea of sort of like they band together and like, no, now we shall take on the plant, but it's not until it hits home. Not until one of their own gets infected and impacted that they start to really take. But even when they go in, and several things happen. I don't think it happens straight away. But even then you have a guy that comes over the tannoy, doesn't it? They've broken in. There's a gunfight for a start, and you see people being gunned down, and a small group get into the plant, and then they come over the tannoy, and they're still saying like, well, if you're willing to go back to your houses and carry on. We're happy to sort of forget about this little incident. We'll carry on. And thinking like people have just been shot outside. But you still get one guy who jumps on the phone and is like, no, look, I'm willing to look I want to go look in those vats or in those domes, and if you're telling the truth, we'll step off. And I'm like, they've just killed people, but you live and work. So that whole section
it's not really very believable, and they do seem like they're really shot like a sort of Frankenstein mob, except in the wilderness, walking along this road, which takes a little away from the image of a mob carrying pitchforks. But you're right; they do sort of like reverse themselves. It seemed like I don't even know. Like why that development was necessary, and you get the barmaid dying, which is sort of comes out of nowhere, but is oddly memorable. I mean, obviously we're sort of trained to see attractive young woman dying, from apparently a targeted meteorite. I don't know why, not sure why they're like, that barmaid marked for death.
Yeah. She's up on that asteroid. Someone's like, nailed it.
It's like there's a Mars attacks alien up there that's just like, got that barmaid.
Yeah. There is little bits of that in this, but it's they do turn, but this is where again, and this is exactly the same as the show. This whole section is very much exactly the same. They go off to see they send them off, and Quatermass is going like, don't go. And what they've done is they've turned off like the oxygen, the nitrogen, that to the vats. They've got control of it. And so or they've turned them up, haven't they? They've turned up the oxygen because they're going to try and poison them. But they send off these guys to go look in the vats, and all of a sudden they're like, they get sold going, well, you're not gonna be able to do it, basically. And there's a crack in the pipe, and this bit. This section really bothers me in a sort of like, it's good, but they're like, oh, there's blood coming out of this pipe. And then Quatermass is like, they've blocked the pipe with those people. It's human pulp. And I'm just like, that is brutal. Like, you don't see it. You see the blood come out the pipe, but I'm still like, that is... In my head, like, because, obviously the aliens are still these little creaturey things. They're like a mass. So there are still people that were infected that have beaten these people to death, done something, and then forced them into a pipe to block it. The first time I watched this, I sort of stumbled past that and had to rewind because I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
It's a really...
It makes an impression. I mean, and I like the line. I think that I love that as a sort of moment of horror. Having said that, I think that, of course, this is in black and white, and the black blood, quote unquote, dripping out of this crack in the pipe. I'm not sure why there's a crack in the pipe right there, but unfortunately, that black blood looks to me very similar to the sort of oil that's coating, the heat. And so my first response, watching it the first time, was, that's some of that oil or those aliens, and so you're just sort of told it's blood, and then it's like they've clogged it with human pulp, and it's like Okay, cool idea. I'm not sure that it makes sense, and visually it doesn't. What you haven't given us the visuals of throwing guys in the pipe, unfortunately, which I'd quite love to see on a Topps trading card. But also visually it doesn't work in the film because you've already established sort of black dripping fluid as something else.
No, I agree with that. Because it's definitely my thought processes that sit behind it that is more. I suppose it's that cliche, isn't it? It's what's more frightening is what you don't see. I'd still like to see it. I don't think Hammer in '57 was ever. I mean, this was an X rating. So if they were like, by the way, not only have you got, because I'm sure like that the guy covered in black goo was one of the things, and there's quite a lot of killing going on in this. But if they were also like, by the way, we also club people to death and force them into a pipe, I think they'd be like, yeah, we're just not releasing this. Like, what is wrong with you? But what I'm more impressed is like, it's in the show as well. This same idea is they have a pipe and a light comes on, indicating there's a blockage, and they open up part of the pipe, and a guy puts his hand in to feel and comes out covered in with blood on it. But again, being black and white, it's still black. So I get that. I agree that there's definitely an issue there. And if it was in color, I suppose it'd be a much easier way to show it. But the fact that I still can't go with the fact that the BBC in 1956, when it was first made, were willing to go, oh no, we're going there. Like, that's still pretty brave to me. Even to say to open that suggestion is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I like the idea of reaching your hand in the pipe. I mean, there's something, first of all, visceral about the viscera. It'd be really great since it's black and white, you just have the guy reach into the pipe and he's like, what is this? And it's blood, and he opens up his hand and he's got an eyeball in his hand. Yeah. That's
just like a clump of hair or something there, like something that really bring it home. Yeah, I do.
It's people. The block is people.
Yeah. It does have that feel. And again, they have the revelation about the sort of what's in there, and you see them in the vats as well, like undulating around and stuff. So they do try and give you something when they can. I think black and white limits this a little bit. But no, that whole bit with the section, because I just want to say that whole section though, the way it ends is slightly ludicrous in both the show and the TV and in the film, because they've got these like machine guns, and then the guy's like, but I also have this rocket propelled, like in this rocket launcher, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I forgot we had that, and he launches it at the domes. And I kind of love that the sort of like oh yeah, we've got these handguns and we've got these machine guns, and for some unknown reason the guards at this plant were armed with a rocket launcher. I'm not sure why.
Well, they were anticipating the town, turning Frankenstein on them.
I'm still not entirely sure a rocket launcher is appropriate, even for a small British village of people that are mostly armed with chair legs.
Well, overkill's the thing. Yeah. No, I mean, you're right, of course. I do love, for me, the sort of like clogging the pipe, you're made out of goo. I mean, you're aliens. There's got to be something better that you can do than pulping humans and shoving them in the works, as horrific and cool as it is, right? So that also sort of lessened the effect for me. But there's no doubt that the just sheer amount of people being gunned down, I mean, the amount of death in this movie, it reminds me of sort of, I kept thinking of Bond, and it reminds me of sort of like the end of a little bit of the Volcano Lair and You Only Live Twice, where it's just like, well, there's ninjas in that, and people are just being gunned down left and right. It's just like, slaughter. Hundreds of people are dead. But I do quite like that sense of chaos and violence.
Yeah, again, it's clearly supposed to be a bit of a step up, isn't it, from Quatermass? They're like, okay, this has tried to be Aliens to Alien in many ways. Like, they've tried to up the ante in that respect of like, okay, you're gonna have a bigger threat and you're gonna have a bigger kill count and the stakes gonna feel higher, and it's definitely. It has that feel to it of like, or you thought the Quatermass X experiment was bad. Oof, you wait till you hear that. I can imagine Hammer leaning into that as part of their advertising of like, well, if you thought the Quatermass experiment was scary, you wait until you see the Quatermass 2. But there, again, you say about the drafts of this. You talk about the sort of the violence that you see at the end of Quatermass and the Pit, where the people turn on each other. Is again, the depiction of brutality of that is another sort of step up. It's not gunning each other; they are literally killing each other in the streets and stuff. And so it is. It's a willingness or a desire to become slightly more violent with each one. And again,
and that's another way that this kind of like seems to prefigure that third one.
Yeah, and if you do ever get around to watching the Quatermass, it's just called Quatermass. It came out in '79. There is more. Again, basically, I'll give you an overview of that because we'll never get around to watching it because I'll explain in a bit. But that has it again. Like it ups the ante again, where they're just like, yeah, we're going to kill swaths of people and not really worry about it. We're going to kill hundreds of people in fell swoops and burn down someone's. I think we're going to burn down a house with people in it at one point in that series. So I think Nigel Neal, I'm quite glad he stopped actually at one point because sooner or later he'd have he'd have turned Quatermass into like Rambo or sort of like Dexter, where he's like, he is a scientist, but he kills people on the side, all in the name of science. But yeah.
I mean, in fairness, this American actor is a bit of a sort of like action hero from the get-go. He doesn't seem really that interested in science. All the science happens between and before the movies.
And by everybody else in his team, I would say. He delegates an awful lot. Because also the thing is about the climax of this film, one of the things is that sort of like, you said, but they launched the rocket launcher, the domes break open, and we get these three mass blob alien things erupt from them. And again, it's done with miniatures, and they're watching it from the hillside. I kind of like it, I do. But more than that, again, is they've identified, as you mentioned before, they've identified this asteroid that sort of sat the other side of the moon. And so they launch the Quatermass 2, the rocket, basically as a missile to use it to blow it up. And that's what they do. And so you see this sort of like little explosion in the sky and then the masses just sort of collapse. So that always was a little anticlimactic to me.
Yeah. And it's very fast too.
Yes.
Like, well, I mean, since that goo can take any shape, I'm just surprised it didn't take the shape of the Michelin Man.
Yeah.
I know you're a big Ghostbusters fan.
That would have been great.
You, Scott.
Yeah. I think just have 3 Stay Puft Marshmallow Men just erupting out of it would have been ace. One of the things I will say is, again, this is where the show differs. And I know I keep making these comparisons, but there's a great bit in this. And this is where I think it's interesting to highlight. So we said that in the show, they highlight that they had a previous rocket that exploded, and there's this problem with the nuclear propulsion. And so they in the show they keep coming back to this, and they're like, well, we can't trust this nuclear propulsion. They mention it several times. You're not allowed to forget this nuclear propulsion. So when they attack, you basically get the climax of the film in the show. But instead of like the things of mass erupting from the domes, the oxygen-rich air getting into the domes kills the aliens, which is what they were trying to do in the first place.
Right.
So that happens, but then they're like, well, but all the people are still possessed because they're still being controlled by this asteroid, and so they follow Quatermass and they chase him down, and then they threaten to use his rocket against him. They're going to basically blow him up. They're going to set off as a nuclear device. Really, that's what they're saying. Well, screw you, sort of thing. But so they take it back. Quatermass and one of his colleagues, and they fly the ship They get in it and fly the ship on a potential suicide mission to the asteroid on the other side of the moon. And the show ends with a fight on the moon when you find out that his partner has been infected. So they have a gun battle on the moon.
That's so awesome.
Also on this asteroid. And then the asteroid fights back and straps. And so the goo comes alive and attaches itself to the ship and so holds it in. And Quatermass luckily is able to separate the ship and fire himself back to Earth in sort of like as a bullet. And then you actually see the nuclear engine overheats or whatever, or whatever, and blows up, killing the asteroid mothership or the queen or whatever it is. You never really understand it, and then you find out that sort of the people back on Earth are no longer possessed. And I'm like, that is such a much better ending. Like, it ends like Quatermass start going, yeah, I've got to go and there's no one else that can do this. I can't ask anybody else to do it. It's my fault. So I'm going to fly this ship up, and he does it. And it adds a much, another dimension to Quatermass of this thing. And instead of just being a grumpy, prick, he actually is willing to sacrifice himself to save the planet and stuff. And it has people in spacesuits fighting on an asteroid with guns.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have to apologize for saying Michelin Man instead of Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
It's a correction I will accept. It's fine.
I apologize profusely. But no, I mean, they changed the ending of the first one, too. And there I could understand it because they didn't want it to be just I'm talking somebody into suicide.
Yeah.
Which would be more anticlimactic than setting it alight. Here, it seems like I don't know why they made that change. It seems like this is a movie that ups the violence count. It's got guys getting machine gunned. I do like the miniatures, even though, as you say, it's over very quickly and it doesn't really represent a great threat. Nobody ever gets close to it. Is the key thing, right? It doesn't lean down and smack anyone with stuff, or absorb things like the blob or something, which they could have done a lot with. It does seem sort of anticlimactic, and I don't buy I don't buy the collective intelligence. I hate any plot where taking out the queen bee sort of disables everyone, right? These clearly this gelatinous sort of gooey alien is capable of operating independently in different people. I don't believe that, this would kill it. And that's such a cliche. And so, it resorts to this cliche and is over. And all I can think of is, I mean, did it not want to go full 50s silly sci-fi? Did it take itself too seriously to have a gunfight on an asteroid?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there's two things. I think it's that. I think this is still Hammer, and they hadn't quite hit their horror groove. By this point you'd had Dracula and Frankenstein had come out, and so they were into that gothic horror thing. And I think they were hoping to lean more into the horror than the sci-fi. Because this is a shock film. That's the whole point. It's an X. It's a shock film, and then I think budgetary restraints. They were probably a bit like, okay, we'd have to build a rocket. We're going to have to do sets. We're going to have to do suits. It's all this other stuff. And look, we can just we've got people beaten into pulps and put into pipes. That's shocking enough. Let's cut here. It's an hour and a half. We've had people killed. Let's pull the cord on it here. I honestly think that's what it would have been. They'd have just looked at it and gone, this is an extra finale we don't need. We've launched the ship remotely. We win. Finish the film. Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, like the budgetary thing sort of makes sense. I mean, this clearly has a bigger budget than the first one. But there's I can understand that, and obviously Hammer did not want to waste too much money, notoriously so. But I like what you're saying about how that's almost I mean, because this comes from a serial, which doesn't, most serials don't have really a traditional act structure. It's been formatted very much into 3 acts. It's a truncated first act with sort of discovering the problem, which 15 minutes in, you're basically done with the first act. And then you have like a solid most of an hour, 45 minutes of the second act, and then you have this sort of climax. So, going beyond the moon to this asteroid and having a gunfight on the asteroid, as wonderful as it sounds, would be like another 20-minute, fourth act. So maybe it's sort of like that doesn't work structurally. It does, like what you're saying, like it sort of feels tacked on.
Yeah, and again, like I say, it works in the show because of how they've been leading up to it. So in the show, like you say, it's a serial. They keep reminding you that this rocket exists, that they've got to do something with it. It's there as their sort of like, it's there as their plan B sort of thing. and so that's when it sort of takes into effect. In this, it's like, oh no, we're going to run in parallel. We're going to have Quatermass invading the plant, and then we're going to have his colleagues back at the thing, sort of like launching it remotely, sort of thing. So it makes sense. I can see why they adjusted it to have it run in parallel, but unfortunately, it results in quite a quick anticlimactic finish. But yeah, I completely understand why those decisions were made, like, budgetary and time wise. Again, this is still in the 50s, where people, sitting for a 2-hour film would have consisted of probably an intermission where everyone got up to have ice cream as well at the hour point. So, they want to keep people in, and they also, this would have been, I think they were trying to keep everything less than sort of like 90 minutes, 80 minutes, at the most, whatever, because a lot of these would have been done as double bills as well. There was that thing of like, if you can get on a double bill, then that's where the money is, and so anything too long and you probably lose that opportunity. I sort of wish some films would think about that now, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, now it's like 3 hours is nothing, Yeah. That used to be reserved for like, big sweeping historical epics or something.
Yeah.
And now it's like, How Bob Became a Cop, the 4-hour investigative deep insight that cost $300 million to make for some reason. So I mean, I think there are movies like this where it could use another 20 minutes. And I think that, the other thing is that the pacing is quite slow in all of these, but it staggers me that, I mean, you have shots of like a car driving around where you're like, how does this take a minute? Like there are things like that where you think, why did you not cut this and put more of the stuff that you're talking about from the serial in? But I mean, I would quite like the sort of Moonraker-esque extravaganza at the end.
Well, what's even more brilliant of it is because the guy who plays Quatermass in the TV show is incredibly sort of like, he's probably sort of in his late 40s, early 50s, so he's sort of very, very British. He's playing the scientist in a very sort of like, non Brian Levy way. So to see him then going off in a rocket ship, sort of like, it feels a little bit like they even make a point of it, like he's not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah,
like for him to be doing this, like he should be in the launch room and not in the ship. And so they make a bit of, which also hits home quite well when they're like, yeah, this is our last ditch effort. Like, we have got you in the ship. That's, how, that's where we're at.
We are.
Yeah.
It's also sort of like full circle with the first one, right? Because in the first one, he has we're used to the cliche of sort of, the scientist experimenting on himself, I've got this radiation that may or may not turn me into a giant spider. I need to test this on myself first. Obviously, like Reed Richards going up in the ship himself. So we're sort of used to that. And the first Quatermass is, eschews that so completely. He has no interest in going up. He's like, I pay people to do that. He would find that utterly absurd. And yet at the end of the second one, at least in the serial, he has become that guy. And so if you started out thinking, damn it, why, this is about Quatermass. Why is he not eager to go up himself? Why is he not the hero as well as the protagonist? He sort of becomes that by the end of 2, at least in the series.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, as I say, like this, I said about having that arc. Like again, like we've only seen the 3. With Quatermass in the pit, like you get to that point in Quatermass in the pit where he sort of lived through that and becomes that hero, where he's now willing to sort of like put himself in harm's way for some of it and to be at the front of the investigation. And so you sort of do get that arc, but because they're so broken up over time and stuff like that, this is why I keep. We'll go back to it. The pitch meeting of this for a reboot is that, like, is basically I actually messaged you and said, like, I've sat here for this evening. I've written up a 2,000-word pitch for how I would bring Quatermass back, and a lot of it is exactly as you've said. It's this guy who's had a life. In the TV series, his daughter is involved. Like, she works with him, but there's never a real mention of his wife or her mother. And obviously, there's no mention of her in the TV, in the films. And so I had this idea of him being this sort of like, he's had this life. He's probably in his late 40s, early 50s when you meet him for Quatermass, the first film, and he's estranged from his daughter. I'd have each of him. So he's estranged from his daughter. He's lost his wife. He's dedicated his life to his work, and it'd be this thing of in his later life reacclimatizing to humanity, like actually getting saying, actually, I keep talking about these grand ideas about the future of saving the human race in space and all this other stuff, but actually I need to be a part of the human race. And it sounds cliche. It sounds cliched, actually, right? Saying it in shorthand, but over this time, and then what I wanted for him to be sort of coming to this term of like, yeah, I've got to get involved, and I've got to, I want to, re-engage with my daughter and my granddaughter, because he has a granddaughter later on. Not in my pitch, in the actual Nigel Neal story. And then to reach the end of Quatermass and the pit, and for him to have reached this point where he is re-engaging with humanity, and to then find out that humanity was actually spawned by aliens, and at our core we have a brutality that can just be switched on, and we will happily kill each other in an instant. For him then to go, do you know what? I'm not entirely sure I can cope with this thing of like having to save humanity and recognizing that we are actually just all animals, and I'm not entirely sure we deserve to go off into space. And then that's when he separates himself off and goes to live and retire in Scotland. And then because of this realization and this acknowledgement of we are from space, we are part alien or whatever, society starts to break down a little bit, and it becomes more and more. And eventually, what happens in Quatermass, or it's called the Quatermass Conclusion, was the film version, the truncated version of the series, which is literally that. They took the episodes and just edited bits out. But in the series, he finds out that his granddaughter, his daughter has been killed, and his granddaughter has gone missing. So Quatermass goes back to London, because he's from Scotland. He travels back to England to start looking for his granddaughter. And he finds out that basically people have just gone potty. Like, they just don't know how to deal with this information. This is 10 years after Quatermass in the pit, I suppose. And so all these sort of like or sort of like cult groups have come up, and they all start worshipping this idea of being aliens. So they're trying to connect with this idea, and they go around, these people traveling as part of this sort of cult. And then all of a sudden, in the show, actually, these beams start coming down, and these people think they are being returned. That's what they think. They think it's like some Halley-Bopp comic kind of deal, sort of Heaven's Gate deal,
like Rapture.
Yeah,
by the aliens,
yeah. So these groups, they think they're being brought back up, but then when they go to the site, Quatermass goes to one of the sites and finds all these skeletons, and they're like, "Oh no, they're not being taken; they are being wiped out." And again, you find that this is actually an invasion plan. Of these things are actually sort of softening up the younger generations by killing them off so that they can come and invade. And it gets down. Then it sort of follows through, and you find all this craziness in London. But it's a really good show. But again, that sort of like, in my head, I'm like, why is this not? Why is this not a show? Like, it baffles me.
Well, and I think that so your vision is sort of to make sense of those 4 serials, as a unified thing, showing Quatermass's progression from, science obsessed, family ignoring to, more human, and then sort of reeling from Quatermass in the pit, sort of in retirement and forced to come out and see a changed world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially with Quatermass in the pit, not just to recognize that, humanity is this brutal thing, but as we see in the film and in the show, it's in him.
Mm-hmm.
And to realize that, I've always been about science and about the clarity that provides me, but to know that this thing is in me terrifies him. And so he sort of has to separate. The only way he deals with it is he separates himself out and it's like, no, knackers to this, I'm off, sort of thing. I just think there's something there. I'd probably pad it out. I think I'd have, again, as I said, Quatermass, the Quatermass experiment. I'd have another one in the middle, something following that, like a new season 2, then the story that's Quatermass 2, then a new one, then Quatermass in the pit, and then have a time jump and finish with the Quatermass conclusion.
So a 5-season plan.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Six technically. So I'd have Quatermass, new one, Quatermass 2, new one, Quatermass in the pit, and then Quatermass. Six seasons is what I've got made. And for those 2 new ones, I've got sort of ideas. But yeah, a 6-season arc that would end with old man Quatermass, sort of like, probably span like a I don't know, 15, 20 years of his life and stuff.
Yeah, I quite like those sort of jumps. Would it be set in present day?
Yes.
Okay. So would it wind up being set slightly in the future by the time you're done?
Yeah, you'd have to keep doing the future thing, and again, you'd have to have that sort of. I'd consider it sort of futuristic realism. I wouldn't want flying. There's no flying cars or that sort of thing. They'd probably have an extent of technology, but I would try and keep it as as common sense as possible, futurist, but without. We're not jumping 20 years into the future and all of a sudden there's cyborgs everywhere.
So do you keep the rocket ships?
I do. And again, what it would be is he wouldn't just be a rocket engineer. He's not just a rocket scientist in those sorts of, general terms. His speciality would be propulsion. Mm-hmm. So he would be focusing on the propulsion. So he is the project lead, but he is also the one. He has created invented this new version of propulsion, and that's what they're testing, and that's what they tested in the Quatermass experiment. And again, he's not working for the government. They're based out of Cornwall or somewhere like that, so it's got quite large expanses of land. He's working for a private enterprise. He did work for the government, but was driven out because of his obsession. And what I said in my thing is basically he was a lecture or a conference or a TED talk or something like that, and basically railed against the government being too small-minded and not, they're not considering the future and all sorts of stuff. So he got pushed out, and then an Elon Musk type picked him up and was like, "Well, I'll happily have you. You can lead my SpaceX program." And that's where we find him, sort of like estranged from his scientist daughter, who still does work for the government. And that's the thing. So it's sort of like, basically he doesn't have to have all the government oversight, and but there's still this thing of like probably permits and stuff. So that's why he's able to launch his rocket without really sort of the government being up his ass about it.
That sounds awesome. I love the ambition of the 6-year plan, and I definitely feel this is ripe for a reboot. Especially in our sort of age of sort of prestige television. I only have a couple notes. Can this Quatermass be American, a woman, and have AIDS?
Yeah. Well, it could be. Yeah. It could be. I do you know what? I really struggled with this actually when I was thinking about it. But just before we came on, we talked about it. The guy I went through casting in my head, and the person I landed on several times was David Harwood. I think it's David Harewood, who done several things. He's British. He was born in Birmingham, and he's currently in Supergirl and stuff. But he just has an authority that I really like. Weirdly, I didn't consider the fact that David Howard, if you don't know, he's a black actor. He's playing John Johns in Supercut at the moment. But weirdly, again, not to say I'm colorblind or anything like that, I didn't think about, it's got to be a white guy. I was just like, who has this sort of like authority, but can sort of come across and can grow that compassion that I could probably see in this character. I'm sure there's others, that could play it. Weirdly, I think Quatermass has to be a man, and that's not sexist. I think that's because he has to have a certain privilege and arrogance that can only come from being a man.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does. I mean, I think that, the sort of like career over family, which is where he starts, is a sort of quintessential male trait. I think taking those traits and putting them in a woman, especially an ambitious woman scientist, is interesting too. But I think you're right that, socially, usually even the most, I mean, Margaret Thatcher knew she was breaking the mold and did it in a different way, so being arrogant and sort of like having the privilege to be blind to certain things is a very male trait.
Yeah, and that's the arc of the show would be him being, as you say, blind to these things. Would be would be the fact he would wake up to some of these things. Like, this idea, especially I would probably say from the first to the third season, would be that arc initially of him. I'm happy to put astronauts in. That's what in this ship. They know the risk. They train for this. That's what they're paid for. That's what their families are paid for. So when they die, it's not. My conscience is clear. I have no problem with that. To then, exactly like you say, by the end of Quatermass, the Quatermass 2 story, which would be season 3, him climbing into the ship, in front of people he knows and loves, and saying, "Well, no, this is the last move. I've got to do this. I'm the only one that can do this. I know the risks. I know what I'm doing. I've got to go and do it." To sort of accept that, I think is, I think that sort of has to be. I don't know. It felt like a male lead to me.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I don't think that's a sexist thing. I think that I mean I definitely identify with sort of, I like what you said of like, not to be like, oh, I'm colorblind, but I identify with the sort of like, oh, it never occurred to me that people would be mad about this, like like oh, wait a minute, this would be controversial, and
it would be
half of Britain would suddenly decide that it grew up with Quatermass and cares about Quatermass more than ever, and that you are destroying a British institution that they hadn't thought of for 10 years before.
Yeah. An IP that hasn't been touched since 1980, since before I was born. The year before I was born, that last one aired. So it's not like, people, you're right. People, oh my God, the Daily Mail. That would be it, wouldn't it? Before Doctor Who, there was Quatermass, and now they want to make it, they want to change him. You're like, well, no one knew who he was. Like,
right. No, I mean, that's true. And, for as much as people want to, and occasionally with some merit, the sort of culture of outrage, and people want to rail at social justice warriors for making issues out of things. The right does it just as much, if not more, especially, and way more disingenuously, in my personal opinion. I could just see those headlines, British icon, race shifted in a pathetic attempt at, inclusion.
Yeah,
get your politics out of my Quatermass.
That's the thing is, I do see this working, and I honestly could see this being a prestige show. I think I don't know if the BBC still own the rights. I assume they do, because they released. I'm just checking. Yeah, they released the most recent version, which was the Quatermass and the Pit TV show on Blu-ray. So they still own this stuff. They probably still own the rights to I don't see why they wouldn't. It seems like a really sort of in a world it's like a bloody film trailer.
You got yourself.
Yeah, I did.
I heard it too.
In the present day, in this anti-science climate, I've said it before, and I think I've sounded like a broken record on this. Quatermass feels like the right hero for the time. You know, we've got the Doctor, and you know, I will say the last couple of seasons have been weaker, more to do with Chibnall than Jodie Whittaker. I think she's actually really good. I just think Chris Chibnall's not great. But I think the Doctor is traversing the path at the moment that's really interesting. And I just think there's more IPs in British science fiction that we could be doing in this area. And it's just, why not? Why not Quatermass?
No, I agree. And I think that, we've talked occasionally about how, British IP, for some reason, doesn't seem to do as well. I mean, Dread has struggled, but 2000 AD has, 1,000 other things that could be adapted, especially into animated series, whatever. It doesn't happen. I mean, it's slightly an exaggeration, but basically I grew up on Dan Dare comics. Yeah. I love Dan Dare comics. I was, I mean, and we've had several revisionist reinventions of Dan Dare at this point. I would love to see a Dan Dare, pilot of the future. Whether, I mean, it would certainly be revisionist to some degree, but whether serious revisionist or not, animated show, live action show, I mean, if you can do Battlestar Galactica, you can do Dan Dare, okay? And Quatermass, is right there. And, what people have to realize is, and I could say this as an American, we love British shit. It took so long for Doctor Who to come over here, but once the average teenager, or 20-something discovers Doctor Who, it took a long time to get that on the radar. But once you discover this stuff, it's cooler because it's British. And part of the mystery, anytime you're investigating a new IP or you're falling in love with a new IP, is figuring out that history, right?
Yeah.
And being like, oh, but wait a minute, it's Professor X actually is this, and all of that sort of trivia and minutia. And having that sort of textured history is more interesting and more important. And so we love British stuff.
Yeah.
We love that stuff. So
you mentioned... I
I
agree, and I think one of the things you say about 2000 AD, you and I both have a massive affinity for 2000 AD, a Dread in particular. But you're right. At the moment, as far as I'm aware, Duncan Jones has been working on a script for a Rogue Trooper movie that excites me. Neil Marshall put himself up as, he'd love to have directed it. Excellent. I think that'd be, But that comic, that anthology, is loaded with stuff. Like, I would love to see all kinds of things. But, if you think like Nemesis the Warlock in an animated TV show, like you could do that sort of that art style of I forget his name now, Christ. But obviously written by Pat Mills. If you think some of the stuff that's being produced at the moment is snarky and make you feel uncomfortable, wait till that. Yes, there's so much stuff, like I say, Rogue Trooper or Skiz or DR and Quinch, all the stuff that sort of like Alan Moore did. DR and Quinch as a limited animated series would be phenomenal. If you think Deadpool breaks the fourth wall in a dangerous, and is crazy, you haven't read DR and Quinch.
Yeah, and if you think Guardians of the Galaxy is, goofy and winky, wait till this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The audience has been primed for it already.
And I think there is definitely an audience for this, most definitely. My big issue, and Rebellion, I don't think you're ever going to hear this, but I don't think Rebellion knows it, or if they do, because I do know for a fact that in the 90s they tried to pre-Rebellion they tried to sell off a bunch of the IP to a number of studios. I think it was Fleetway.
Yeah.
But they now own the IPs for these things. But they don't want to be proactive about it. I think that they seem to want to wait for people to come to them. Oh, we see that Dredd, we want to move on from the 1995 Dredd. We want to do another one. Great. Duncan Jones has turned up and said he wants to write a script for Rogue Trooper. Okay, good. Do it. All right. Why have I not got you banging on the door of people going, you really should make a Zenith film or a Zenith. You think that if The Boys sells,
Might piss off Grant Morrison, but I mean, you know, but no, I mean, Zenith is amazing. I mean, that's another thing I sort of grew up on.
I mean, it's incomplete, but like you got Halo Jones,
right?
There's IPs out absolutely. This book has got that much stuff. Bring the creators back. Let them be involved. Do the right thing. You saw what happened. Yeah.
And, I mean, I love, well, I wouldn't say I love it. It's a very mixed bag, but, Tarkovsky's Primal. Well, I'm the biggest fan of Flesh. I mean, that might not sustain a series, but you could do that as a movie. Do it silent, do it just, dinosaur devouring stuff. I mean, I that strip is something that struggled in 2000 AD with several revivals, but I could easily see succeeding. And I don't know about the politics of rebellion, except what I've read largely in 2000 AD and magazine. But it seems to me that it's not that expensive these days to do an animated series or two, and especially if you keep costs down, and you don't hire the big name celebrities to do voice acting, which, probably an animated Judge Dredd or Rogue Trooper doesn't need Will Ferrell. Okay. Yeah. So, I don't see why these different, whether it's I mean, obviously the BBC has a special relationship with the government and everything, and is constrained in certain respects. But when it comes to Rebellion and other British IP holders, I don't see why the Marvel method of getting a loan and, using that to finance, say, 3 animated miniseries or something, of 8 episodes, 10 episodes each or something like that, that would seem very doable and something that probably, you're going to be able to probably pre-sell with, Netflix or Amazon or an outlet like that.
Yeah, and again, like you said, the IP doesn't have to be massively known. The Boys was a pretty small independent comic, for a long time. How many, I can guarantee you its sales now, since the TV show, are going to be a hell of a lot higher than it ever was before, even when it was being released. And probably the same with Invincible. These things, the people are aware of them. And the thing in my head, I keep thinking of, like, is sort of Nemesis the Warlock. It's got a really distinctive look. Kevin McNeil, that's it. Kevin McNeil art. Have him doing, have not do the animation, but try and maintain a little bit of that art style in the animation, and then have, introduce that world with Torquemada and Nemesis the Warlock, and people would lap that. They're like, sorry, this is a comic. Oh yeah, this is a comic. This is how weird. And like this critique of conservative government in the 80s does go as far as being a fascist underground society. So yeah, I think I don't know why these British IPs stall so much. Part of me does think it's not insecurity, that's the wrong word, but like I think it's scope. We're a bit like, oh well, we're fine. We've got it on the BBC, and we'll leave it at that sort of thing. But again, like you say, like look at Harry Potter or the Edgar Wright Cornetto trilogy. Like you can't get anything more fundamentally British in many ways than sort of like Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and the World's End. World's End is about a pub crawl in a small British village. Like they are really small scope sort of British films, but they are massive. I mean, granted, they are well written and well acted and very well made films, but there's that fundamental Britishness that just seems to sort of succeed. Especially in the States at times when it's done right. Don't know why it doesn't get done. But Good Omens. Amazon did Good Omens.
Oh yeah, and quite good actually.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that a lot.
And that was incredibly British. That's Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. You can't, that's again. I don't know why. I don't know why there's not some of these things just don't get picked up. And again, if you were to talk to people that are already at that level, if you were to say to Edgar Wright or Neil Gaiman or Neil Marshall, Duncan Jones, these people we've all mentioned, and say to them, when I look at some of these IPs from 2000 AD, or we found this thing Quatermass, what do you think? I'm pretty sure they'd all be like, oh, no, yeah. Pretty sure they'd all be aware of at least some of them. They'd be going, oh, no, you should really go do this. If you liked Game of Thrones, you should read Slain,
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
If you thought Game of Thrones wasn't violent enough, we have the IP for you.
Yeah. I don't know. It all just feels a little bit,
conservative, or keep the turtle keeping its head in the shell a little.
A little bit, yeah. That's the only explanation I can ever give it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of like small market syndrome. I mean, and I see this with it's certainly true with French stuff, where I mean, we did Valerian last season, and there's a lot of French stuff. I mean, when is Meta Baron's going to be turned into anything, right? And so there is this sort of feeling. I mean, this is true of like Japanese stuff, although in Japan there's a big market for manga and anime, so you can afford to do that stuff, and for films based on this stuff, so you can afford to do that. But that stuff is generally made for the Japanese market, and it's exported later. There's the cliche of like Japanese IP holders never even considering any market outside of Japan, and sometimes letting stuff go for peanuts and not even taking action against like massive piracy because they're like, well, that doesn't count. It's outside of Japan. We have no market there. Which obviously, it's less true in some cases, like, Bandai. But I think there is a sort of like small market syndrome sort of thing of how do we adapt this, and then part of the problem is when you do get this stuff, get some American funding usually, or get some Hollywood money or Amazon money, it gets adapted a little too much, right? Which I think is too often the case. It's like, well, this is interesting, but well, I mean, that was the case with the first Judge Dredd movie, right? Like, we love this IP, but you got to understand we're selling this to America, And I think one of the great advantages of this sort of era that we're in, especially in terms of television and streaming, is that there's almost no such thing as anything that's not a niche market. And those niche markets are way more profitable than they were in the past. And so you can take something and not castrate it, not make it, American, and have it succeed on its own terms. And if anything, it's going to stand out better because it is British and different.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think we've now got to a point where we are acclimatized and, vaccinated towards weirdness. There was a period when you were like, oh, you were never going to see, Doom Patrol is the last IP you are going to see as a TV show. And all of a sudden it's got 2 seasons and they're good. They're good and they're weird. And then you're on Netflix, Netflix you get like Stranger Things and The Umbrella Academy, and then you've got Swamp Thing appearing elsewhere and The Boys. You say, we are sort of used to this level of violence and weird, where we go, oh no, that's what this. You meet it on its terms. Like, it's not going to meet you on your. It's just going to come at you, and you either accept it or you don't. And a lot of people are willing to do that now.
one of the key things with 2000 AD, and I mean, this sounds pejorative, and I don't mean it that way, is accepting tastelessness, right?
Yeah.
Just accepting the pulp, obviously people, Pat Mills and so many other creators are thoughtful, intelligent people, but there's a pulpiness of just like, no, let it be violent, let it be raw, let it be that, just in your face. Don't try to paper it over and make it acceptable. And so you're right about weirdness. I was thinking, to get back to Quatermass.
So
Assuming that the BBC, I mean, we could talk all day about what Rebellion should do. I mean, we could do that as a short, but with if the BBC really does own the rights, I mean, if nothing else, I mean, I don't know how you'd feel about like using Doctor Who as a backdoor pilot or something. I mean, every Doctor Who spinoff, with the exception of Torchwood, which I'm a big fan of, but I admit is very uneven. There's this, every Doctor Who spinoff basically fails. And in the last 10 years, they've tried several, all of which kind of like are a little uneven and struggle and ultimately get canceled. It would seem like, I mean, the tone of this is different than Doctor Who, but it would seem like the BBC has, I mean, I've got a BBC channel now, I mean, I have for 5-6 years or something. It would seem like there's an audience for this, and there's a built-in vehicle, even if it's not Doctor Who. I mean, I've watched Humans and you haven't, right? Well, there's an audience for this stuff. There's a channel for this stuff. You could even piggyback it some way into Doctor Who.
Oh no, definitely. Like, Quatermass is an IP, is a character you could easily introduce in Doctor Who. Again, like, you have him as an have it as that gateway thing where, like, he has been mentioned weirdly at least twice, not being called Quatermass, but being called Bernard, or and which is obviously a nod. And I think they do it in the classic Who, and they've done it in New Who as well. So there's a clear acknowledgement, but you could easily do that, like, is it in an episode where he doesn't even have to be a main character, like, a secondary character where you'd want to set him up, so you probably would have to have him as a part of the main of the story. But he helps the Doctor, and then an acknowledgement, off, with Quatermass goes off, and the Doctor saying that how excited she is now that, like, I got to meet Bernard Quatermass. If you think I've done amazing things, you wait till you find out what he gets up to, sort of thing. Like, and then you go, oh, what the hell does he get up to? Like, it's like if the Doctor is endorsing him as a known historical figure in this fictitious world, like, yeah, have him go off then, because again, like, the events of the Quatermass films don't. They wouldn't impact on the canon of Doctor Who. Because then you go off and you go, okay, well, I can't destroy the world. I can't fundamentally change anything away from this sort of futurist realism. Because the Doctor's always got to exist and be able to visit this time period. That's fine. But if you look at the shows, yeah, all right, he sends up a rocket, comes back, it's person's infected. That could well be a Doctor Who story, and then you go through them, and even this realization that actually, maybe not all, but a part of the population is seeded by aliens and stuff, still works. It still sits in it, and these events, they're all resolved. They don't end the world. So, yeah, I honestly think that it could work. I think in fact probably the best way to do it is to introduce him as a that would be probably the most successful way for the BBC to do it. Yeah, I'd love someone in the BBC to hear this. Never gonna happen, but you never know. Might get an email. That's 20th Century Geek at gmail.com, just in case anyone's listening.
Well, I mean,
Author
I think
Rebellion. There you go.
yeah, that's right. I mean, these are brilliant. Look, basically, all we are saying is BBC, call Scott, put Scott in charge of both the Quatermass property and Doctor Who. And call Julian and Scott. We will together manage all of Rebellion's IP for them.
Yeah.
We're not asking a lot here. But look, I love your 6-season plan. This is the kind of like love for Quatermass. It's due. I'm sold. I'm a Yank who hadn't heard of Quatermass before. Quatermass in the Pit. In fact, it took me like a year to stop calling him Quatermass.
Yeah.
Just by force of the word quarter being in my.
Getting back to the film, so we will wrap up. It seems to have taken Brian Dunleavy quite a while as well, because he can never determine how he says it. At one point it's Quatermass, another point it's Quatermass, and he can't seem to say it. He really struggles with that name.
Well, looking at a couple things, looking at Wikipedia, which is the scholarly source par excellence. First of all, interesting fact. I mean, there's dispute about Dunleavy being drunk during production, right?
Yeah.
And, some of the accounts are quite funny. Of him looking at cue cards and saying that's too many words, which I don't know how much I believe. It's disputed. The other thing that's fascinating is apparently Quatermass 2 was the first sequel to have a number in it.
It is, yes.
That's staggering. I mean, yes. So we live in the era of sequels and reboots, right? 90% of everything, is some sort of reboot or sequel. Every time you see that too, it started here, folks.
Yes, the BBC. Yeah. So there you go. I forgot to mention that. Yes, that's true. It was accredited to something else, but it was determined that came out at least 2 years later. So actually, yeah, Quatermass 2 is the first sequel to use a numeral in its title. Yeah. Anyway, getting back to that then. So, drunk Dunleavy or not, what were your final thoughts then on Quatermass 2?
I think it's quite enjoyable. I don't know whether I like this better or less than the first. I like the Pit the best. I see why you chose that. It stays in my memory. I have trouble remembering basic elements of the plot of the first one. I have to sort of like figure it out or look it up. But that third one sticks in my head. The pod of the ship on the underground sticks in my head, and of course that climax is fantastic. The cathedral climax in 1 is good. But I think the climax is weak in this. Having said that, I love the action and I love the mystery. And I think that, while the mystery, is a little weak with this mark on the face and stuff, there's black goo and, there's other, like, I mean, it's hard to beat. This is my moon base. Setup. That's a great. I mean, if that's the end of the first installment of a 2000 AD serial, you are very happy, right? That's a fantastic cliffhanger for an episode. So I quite liked it, and through most of it, I thought, I think I like this better than the first. Ultimately, I don't know, but I do really like the action, and I do really like aspects of the mystery. What about you?
No, the same. I definitely like this more than the first. I think the first one has a very specific tone and is going for something. This is slightly darker, and it seems more involved in what it wants to do. So the first one's quite small. It's got a very small cast. This one's willing to go out and it's got a whole village of people that are involved, and the fact that the sort of interweaving of government bureaucracy. It all sounds to say that it sounds boring, but it's not. I love all that stuff. This mystery, the fact that it goes up to the highest levels of government and stuff, and it feels like the X-Files at times. That that thing of sort of being brought into it. But then, like you say, the guy getting covered in the black goo and dying at Quatermass's feet. And then, like you say, the gun battle at the end, and this idea of people being pulped and forced into a pipe. This is really sort of they're really wanting to grab you by the collar a bit more and be like, no, look, we're doing something darker. And it succeeds. I enjoy it. The one thing I would say is I agree. The climax is weaker. It sort of just ends, and I'm left thinking, hang on a minute, you've just left this mass of black stuff laying over the sort of British countryside. What happens next? There's got to be some sort of, and I think that's a thing of films of this era. They just sort of end a little bit, but. I really enjoy this film. I agree. Quatermass in the Pit is definitely superior as a series and a film. Nigel Neal got better and better. But I do recommend this. Go out. Don't forget all these films have been black and white, so you have to accept that. But it's good. It's good fun. It's really good fun. I really enjoyed watching this one. So I'm glad we've been able to do the Quatermass trilogy.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking earlier, I think like technically Quatermass accounts for like almost a tenth of all the movies we've done. It's totally ridiculous. Yeah. I would say one additional criticism of this film is that I like what you were saying about bureaucracy, but I want to see a member of the royal family, preferably the Queen, infected. I mean, and that you can do it as a cliffhanger, but I mean, the Doctor Who, some of my favorite stuff was the Prime Minister. The Master is the Prime Minister. So if they dare do it,
you'd have that as the final. You'd have that as the final series cliffhanger. Would be, he gets to meet the Queen to be thanked for saving the country and the Commonwealth and all that sort of stuff. And then as she sort of like shakes his hand or something, you'd see the mark on her wrist and you'd be like, oh my God, there's another asteroid.
Yeah. Ew, never mind. I burned myself on something.
Yeah. Bitten by a corgi. She was bitten by a corgi. Yeah, no, I think that, there's so much we can do with this. And we've said what should be done with not just Quatermass, but British IPs. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this, and this is the only one where I think we've done an original and the sequel. So they say it makes up a 10th, but this is also the first sort of like full series we've done within the main seasons. So I've really enjoyed that. But yeah, there we go. That's Quatermass. So we've done Quatermass 1, 2, and 3. So go back and find the others. You'll definitely enjoy them. But next, on the next episode, we're finishing out the final film of our 50s sci-fi block, and we're going to be changing tone again. We're going for, so instead of going for British IP, we're going for a William Castle film, the Vincent Price starring The Tingler from 1959. And we are recording this as of on the 16th of May, and so just to point out that this is actually in May is Vincent Price's 110th birthday. This month, so we will be doing sort of like celebrating this year with doing The Tingler, which is one of the films that really reignited his career in the late 50s. So looking forward to that. I've got a special edition Blu-ray, and
I just don't know how. Why did they look in my nightstand drawer and make a movie about that?
Oh, it's a real shocker for 59. Yeah, I can't believe this was released.
Yeah, if you thought Rated X was not enough for you, just wait till you see Vincent Price. When you hear the motor of that vibrator start, you know you're in trouble.
Yeah, you think you're joking? This had electrified vibrating seats in cinemas as part of William Castle's setup. So we'll
have to talk about that next time. But I love those like smell-o-vision and that whole era of trying to make movies not just 3D but more sensory in some way.
We'll talk about it on the next episode. But as always, if you want to get in contact, if you've got any comments or questions or anything about the films we've talked about, or any of the proposals we've made, if you're the director of the BBC or the CEO of Rebellion, happily get in contact with us. You can reach us at Podtime Space on Twitter, or if you do want to email us, you can email it at 20th Century Geek at gmail.com. And we will happily talk about any of the films that we've watched and reviewed, and we've got some awesome stuff coming up in the future as well. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And Julian, I shall speak to you in the next episode.